The silver screen shows a hero standing triumphant in the sand. You have seen this story 100 times, a slave fighting for freedom against impossible odds. But what if almost everything you know about gladiators is a brilliant lie crafted by Hollywood? This journey will completely reshape your understanding of ancient Rome's most famous warriors, separating cinematic fantasy from historical fact. We will uncover why the iconic thumbs down signal is probably wrong, and how a gladiator's life involved more fame and fortune than you might expect. By the end, you will see these fighters not as disposable slaves, but as the complex professional athletes they truly were. So what is the most surprising gladiator myth you have always believed was true? One of the most iconic scenes in cinema is utterly wrong. You know the moment. The gladiator stands over his defeated opponent, looking up to the emperor for the final verdict. A thumb jerks downward, and the crowd roars for blood. This gesture is so deeply embedded in our culture that we use it to mean disapproval in everyday life. But the historical truth is far more ambiguous and surprising. Ancient texts and artworks suggest the signals were likely the opposite of what we see on screen. A thumb pointed upward, a gesture we associate with approval, might have actually meant kill him. A closed fist with the thumb tucked safely inside could have been the signal for mercy to sheath the sword. This reversal makes sense when you think about the action. A thumb thrust upward could mimic the final, killing blow of a sword plunging into a vulnerable neck. A concealed thumb, meanwhile, visually represents the sword being kept in its scabbard. So how did we get it so backwards? The misconception was cemented by classic Hollywood films, which needed clearer visual shorthand for a mass audience. They chose the more dramatic and intuitively obvious gestures, creating a powerful myth that has lasted for generations. The real story, lost to time and artistic license, reveals just how carefully we must separate the spectacle of cinema from the fragments of historical evidence. That single gesture reveals a deeper, more pervasive myth about the gladiators' entire existence. We are taught to see them as slaves, shackled and forced into the arena against their will. While many gladiators did begin their lives as prisoners of war or enslaved criminals, a staggering number were not slaves at all. They were free men who walked into the arena by choice. These volunteers, known as octorati, were a diverse group. They were former soldiers lured by the promise of a soldier's pay without the long marches, disgraced aristocrats desperate to restore their family's honor through a dangerous new fame, and everyday citizens seduced by the roar of the crowd. They did not sign their lives away under the whip, but with a contract, legally binding themselves to a gladiator school for a share of the winnings and a shot at immortality. What would drive a free man to choose such a perilous path? The motivations were as complex as the men themselves. For some, it was pure, undeniable economics. A successful gladiator could earn in a single afternoon what a common laborer might make in a year. For others, it was the intoxicating allure of fame and glory, a chance to be celebrated like a modern sports superstar, their names chanted by tens of thousands. And for a select few from the upper classes, the arena offered a brutal but swift path to social redemption, a way to erase a scandal or a mountain of debt with blood and courage. This reality completely reframes the gladiator, transforming him from a passive victim into an active participant in a high-stakes profession. He was not always a man fighting for his freedom, but often a man fighting for his fortune. So if these men were not slaves in chains, what was their daily life truly like? Forget the dark dungeons and constant brutality. A professional gladiator lived more like a modern elite athlete than a prisoner. His home was a ludus, a specialized training school that functioned as a high-stakes boarding house and sports academy. Here, he received a diet richer than the average Roman citizen, with meals designed to build strength and endurance. He trained for hours each day with wooden swords against a wooden post, honing his technique to perfection under the watchful eye of a seasoned trainer. This was not mindless brawling, it was a disciplined craft, requiring the precise footwork of a dancer and the strategic mind of a chess player. The owner of the school, the Lanista, was not a cruel slaver but a shrewd businessman. He had invested a small fortune in acquiring and training his fighters. A top-tier gladiator represented a significant financial asset, one he had no intention of wasting on a meaningless death. These men were protected investments, not disposable entertainment, and like any valuable asset, they had the potential for an incredible return. A victorious gladiator was entitled to a share of the prize money, and the most successful could amass wealth that would be the envy of many. They were adored by fans, their faces recognizable on street murals, and their names whispered in gossip. Some even achieved the ultimate dream, saving enough to buy their freedom and retire comfortably, their fighting days behind them. This image of a wealthy, celebrated professional stands in stark contrast to the Hollywood archetype of a perpetually suffering slave. The arena was a brutal place, but for the men who chose to enter it, it was also a path to a life they could never have imagined otherwise. The most dangerous myth is that every fight was a bloody execution. In reality, the arena was rarely a slaughterhouse. Gladiators were simply too expensive to waste. Think of them as star athletes signed to multi-million-dollar contracts. No team owner would casually throw that investment away in a single game. The Lanista, the school owner, had paid a fortune to train and maintain his fighters. A dead gladiator was a total loss, a burned pile of money on the sand, so the actual goal of a match was not death, but a decisive and crowd-pleasing victory. A referee, much like in a modern boxing match, was always present to enforce the rules and stop the fight before a fatal blow could land. The combat was a skilled demonstration, a contest to wound, disarm, or force an opponent to submit. A gladiator would signal surrender by raising a single finger. This is when the fateful decision for life or death would be made, but the outcome was often survival. We know this because records from Pompeii list gladiators by their fight records, noting one man as a veteran of 21 bouts and another of 14. These are not the resumes of men fighting to the death every time. The evidence points to high survival rates. After a match, wounded fighters were taken to a well-equipped hospital where Roman doctors, some of the best in the ancient world, treated their injuries. They used surgical tools and techniques that would remain advanced for centuries, stitching wounds and setting broken bones. The financial logic was undeniable. A popular gladiator who survived many fights became a bigger and bigger draw, filling the seats for the next spectacle. His fame grew with each appearance, making him more valuable with every scar. This system was built on repetition, not disposal, so while the risk of death was always present, the reality was a career of brutal, refereed contests, not a single, fatal performance. Hollywood often presents a single, generic warrior, but the arena was a stage for a spectacular cast of specialized fighters. Each gladiator belonged to a distinct class, a unique combination of weapons, armor, and fighting style that turned every match into a strategic duel. Imagine it less like a chaotic brawl and more like a deadly game of rock, paper, scissors played with steel. One of the most recognizable was the Retiarius, the fisherman of the arena. He was the lightest of the gladiators, a swift and agile fighter who wore almost no armor at all. His tools were a weighted net, a long trident, and a small dagger. His entire strategy revolved around speed and distance. He would dance around his opponent, casting his net to entangle and trip them, creating an opening for a deadly thrust with his three-pronged spear. He was almost always paired against the secutor, the chaser. This matchup was a classic clash of opposites. The secutor was built for relentless forward pressure. He wore a heavy, enclosed helmet with only two small eye holes, a massive rectangular shield, and a greave on one leg. His helmet was smooth and rounded specifically so the Retiarius net would slide right off. His goal was to weather the storm, close the distance, and overpower the lightly armored fisherman in close combat. Then there was the Murmillo, named for the fish on his helmet's crest. He was the quintessential heavy infantryman of the arena, armed with a large, rectangular shield and a short, straight sword called a gladius. His body was well protected by armor on his sword arm and leg. He was a powerhouse, designed for strong, methodical attacks and solid defense. He was frequently matched against the Thrax or Thracian. The Thrax was a more agile and versatile warrior. He carried a small, square shield, but his signature weapon was a curved sword called a sika, perfect for making slashing attacks over or around a large shield. His legs were heavily armored with greaves, and he wore a distinctive helmet topped with a griffin's head. These were not random pairings. The Romans carefully orchestrated these duels to maximize drama and showcase different tactical advantages. The Retiarius had the range and trickery to defeat the slow, plodding secutor, but the Murmillo, with his massive shield, could effectively block the trident's thrusts, while the Threek's curved blade could find clever angles around that same shield. Each fighter had a natural predator and a natural prey. This intricate system transformed the violence into a spectacle of skill and strategy, where knowing your opponent's weaknesses was just as important as knowing your own strength. That intricate system of specialized fighters did not exist only in Rome. The grand spectacles we associate with the Colosseum were in fact a common event echoing from one corner of the empire to the other. While the Flavian Amphitheater in Rome was the most famous stage, it was far from the only one. Gladiatorial games were a truly mass-market entertainment, a cultural phenomenon that reached into the smallest of provincial towns. All across Roman territory, from the sun-baked cities of North Africa to the misty frontier outposts of Britain, local communities built their own venues for these bloody contests. In Pompeii, for example, a stone amphitheater that could seat the entire town stood decades before the Colosseum was even a blueprint. In more remote or less wealthy areas, they did not need permanent stone. Impresarios would erect massive, complex wooden arenas that could be assembled for a festival and then taken down, moving the spectacle from one town to the next like a traveling circus. This network of venues meant that for the average Roman citizen, the chance to see gladiators was not a once-in-a-lifetime trip to the capital, but a regular local event. It was a social gathering, a holiday from work, and a powerful display of Roman culture and power. The games were a binding agent for the empire, a shared experience that connected a Briton on the edge of the known world to the heart of Rome itself. He might never see the Colosseum, but he knew the roar of the crowd and the clash of steel in his own hometown amphitheater. This widespread popularity underscores the true nature of the gladiator. He was not a rare creature confined to the capital, but a working professional on a circuit, a celebrity whose fame could be built in 100 different cities. The roar of the crowd was not reserved for gladiators alone. The arena was a stage for a full day of carefully orchestrated spectacle, a multi-act drama designed to awe and control. This entire event was known as the Munera, a gift from a wealthy patron to the people, and its purpose was far more complex than simple entertainment. The morning would begin not with human combat, but with the venations, the wild beast hunts. Exotic animals from the farthest reaches of the empire, lions from North Africa, tigers from Persia, elephants from India were paraded before the crowd and then hunted by specialized fighters called venators. These men were not gladiators, but skilled hunters who faced incredible danger in a display of Rome's power over nature itself. The message was clear: Rome could conquer not only human enemies, but the wildest beasts of the earth. Following the hunt, the mood would shift dramatically for the midday interlude. This was the time for the execution of condemned criminals, the noxii. These were not honorable duels, but brutal, one-sided punishments designed to be a public lesson in the consequences of defying Roman law. The methods were gruesome and symbolic, often pitting the unarmed convicts against the very animals just hunted, a practice known as damnatio ad bestias. This grim theater reinforced the social order, demonstrating the absolute power of the state and the fate that awaited those who broke its rules. Then, in the afternoon, the gladiators would finally appear, their skilled duels representing the pinnacle of martial virtue. But the spectacle could become even grander. On rare, extraordinary occasions, the entire arena floor would be flooded to stage a naumatia, a mock naval battle involving thousands of combatants and full-sized ships. These events were the ultimate display of imperial wealth and engineering, transforming the arena from a battlefield into an ocean, from the symbolic conquest of nature to the brutal enforcement of justice, and finally to the celebration of military skill. The Munera was a complete narrative of Roman power. It was politics written in blood and sand, a tool to distract, impress, and remind every citizen of their place in the world's greatest empire. Even the rigid social order of Rome held space for a shocking contradiction. The arena, a world dominated by masculine ideals of strength and courage, also featured female fighters. These women, known as gladiatrices, were a rare but very real part of the spectacle. A stone relief from Halicarnassus in modern Turkey offers some of our clearest proof. It depicts two women, identified by the names Amazonia and Achilia, locked in combat. They are armed and armored like their male counterparts, and the inscription specifically states they were granted an honorable discharge, proving they fought with skill and survived. These were not actresses in a play, they were professional combatants. Their existence, however, was a source of deep controversy for Roman society. The ideal Roman woman was a matron, a mother who managed the household with modesty and dignity. A woman who fought for entertainment in the public gaze, wearing little armor and shedding blood for a cheering mob, overturned every one of those values. She was seen as a grotesque novelty, an exotic attraction for an audience that had seemingly seen everything. The very concept of a female gladiator was so socially disruptive that the Emperor Septimius Severus issued a formal ban on their participation around the year. He did so not out of concern for the women's safety, but to stop what he saw as a disgraceful spectacle that mocked the dignity of the Roman state. The gladiatrix represent the outer limits of the gladiator phenomenon. She was a walking paradox, a figure who challenged the very foundations of her society while simultaneously providing it with a forbidden thrill. Her brief, controversial career on the sand reveals just how far the Roman hunger for novelty could push against its own strict cultural rules. Hollywood loves to cast the gladiator as a rebellious barbarian, a foreign savage fighting against the machine of Rome. This is perhaps the most persistent character in the entire cinematic myth. We see him as a tribesman ripped from his homeland, a symbol of untamed nature forced to perform for his captors. While it is true that the ranks of gladiators were sometimes filled with prisoners of war, this image of the wild outsider is a profound misunderstanding of their true role. The gladiator was not a symbol of anti-Roman rebellion. He was, in fact, the ultimate symbol of Roman order. His entire existence was governed by a strict code of conduct, a set of rituals and rules that transformed raw violence into a civilized spectacle. Before a fight, these men would parade before the crowd in a formal procession, their finest armor gleaming in the sun. They would then stop before the editors, the wealthy patron funding the games, and recite the famous oath, "We who are about to die salute you." This was not an act of defiance. It was a public declaration of their willingness to die according to the rules of the institution. They were not wild men. They were professionals bound by a sacred duty to perform their craft with discipline and honor. Think of them not as barbarians, but as cogs in a vast, well-oiled machine of Roman culture. Their fights followed precise regulations overseen by referees. Their training was a disciplined art. Even their deaths, when they occurred, were meant to be a display of Roman virtue, a stoic acceptance of fate. This system was designed to showcase the very ideals Rome held most dear: discipline, order, and the triumph of civilization over chaos. The gladiator, whether he was born in Gaul or in Italy, was absorbed into this framework. He fought not as a foreigner, but as a Roman performer on the world's most dangerous stage. The very helmet that defined a gladiator's identity was a masterpiece of brutal practicality. Far from the open, expressive face guard seen in movies, a real gladiator's helmet was a heavy, enclosed shell of bronze or iron, often featuring an incredibly wide, sloping brim and two tiny eye holes that offered a frighteningly limited view of the world. This was not a design for theatrics or to hide the man inside. It was a direct response to the physics of combat in the arena. The broad, reinforced brim was engineered to deflect the most common and deadly attack, a downward slash from a sword or an axe aimed at the top of the head or the vulnerable shoulders. Those small eye holes were a necessary trade-off, protecting the eyes from a thrusting blade or a hook from a net. A film helmet allows the audience to see the actor's grimace and sweat, to connect with his humanity. A historical helmet sacrificed all of that for one simple purpose: survival. It transformed the gladiator into a near impenetrable fortress from the neck up, forcing his opponent to target less armored areas like the back or the legs. This design philosophy reveals the gladiator's fight as a specialized technical duel, not a wild, cinematic brawl. The armor was a puzzle, and every piece, especially the helmet, was a critical part of the solution. Behind that anonymous helmet was a man forged in one of the most disciplined institutions of the ancient world. The gladiator school, or ludus, was not a squalid prison, but a high-security training facility that functioned with the ruthless efficiency of a military academy. Imagine a sprawling complex surrounded by high walls and guarded gates, part barracks, part gymnasium, and part corporate headquarters. Inside, life followed a strict, unyielding hierarchy. At the top was the lanista, the owner and master of the school, a businessman who managed his stable of fighters as valuable assets. Below him were the doctors, the specialized trainers, each an expert in a specific style of combat. There was a doctor for the heavily armed Murmillo, another for the nimble Retiarius, and others for every class of gladiator. These were not former slaves barking orders, but seasoned veterans who drilled their students in the precise mechanics of their craft. The gladiators themselves lived in Spartan but adequate barracks, their lives dedicated to a single purpose: perfection in the arena. Their daily regimen was grueling and monotonous. Mornings began with intense physical conditioning, building the strength and stamina needed to wield heavy weapons under the blistering sun. The bulk of the day was spent in weapon drills, practicing against wooden posts or with blunted swords under the critical eye of their doctor. This was not about learning to brawl, it was about mastering footwork, learning to conserve energy, and executing a limited set of attacks and parries with flawless precision. Every movement was choreographed and practiced until it became second nature. Even their diet was scientifically controlled, a high carbohydrate and protein-rich meal plan designed to build bulk and power, far superior to the fare of the average Roman citizen. This entire system was built on one simple, brutal economic principle. A well-trained, well-fed, and healthy gladiator was a profitable gladiator. He represented a significant financial investment, and the ludus was the machine designed to protect that investment and maximize its return. The chaotic, filthy pits of Hollywood could not be further from the truth. The real ludus was a professional, organized, and shockingly modern institution where violence was not an outburst of passion, but a carefully managed product. The emperor watching from his shaded podium is another powerful image Hollywood got mostly wrong. He was not an all-powerful god king, arbitrarily deciding every gladiator's fate with a solitary thumb. In reality, the games were a complex dialogue between the ruler and the ruled. While the emperor or a wealthy politician served as the editor, the sponsor who financed the event, his control was far from absolute. He was performing for the people just as much as the gladiators were. The true power in the amphitheater resided not in the imperial box, but in the roaring, breathing entity that was the Roman crowd. This audience was a microcosm of Roman society itself, a carefully segregated hierarchy. Senators and vestal virgins occupied the best front row seats, while the common citizens, the plebeians, filled the higher, sun-baked tier. Yet for a few hours, this rigid social structure was temporarily inverted. The crowd spoke with one voice, and even an emperor had to listen. They were not passive spectators. They were active, demanding, and brutally vocal participants. They placed bets on their favorite fighters, their cheers and jeers creating a palpable current of energy that could shape the entire event. When a gladiator fought well, the crowd would erupt in a rhythmic chant of habit, hoc habet. He has it, meaning he has been wounded, a macabre but appreciative acknowledgement of a good hit. More importantly, when a defeated fighter raised his finger in surrender, the crowd's reaction was the single biggest factor in deciding his fate. They would shout mit. Let him go, or with equal passion, Jugula, cut his throat. The editor, the man who paid for the games, was caught in a difficult position. Granting mercy against the crowd's wishes could be seen as weak, a failure to give the people what they wanted. But ordering a death against the crowd's fervent pleas for mercy could spark anger and resentment, a dangerous political misstep. The Emperor Commodus, who famously fancied himself a gladiator, learned this the hard way. His arrogant and staged appearances in the arena often drew boos and criticism from a crowd that respected genuine skill over imperial pretense. So the next time you see that scene of a silent, obedient crowd waiting on the emperor's whim, remember the truth. The real Colosseum was a political arena as much as a sporting one, a place where the voice of the Roman people, for a brief and bloody moment, truly mattered. That roaring crowd held a secret, one whispered in poetry and scratched onto the walls of the city itself. Beyond the admiration for their skill, gladiators were objects of intense and widespread desire. Roman poets like Juvenal and Ovid wrote of society matrons, even senators' wives, who became infatuated with these men of the arena. Graffiti from Pompeii immortalizes this adoration, with one scrawled message from a fan named Severus plainly stating, "Crescens the Rosciarius, doctored the girls at night." This was not a quiet admiration, it was a public, palpable fascination. The appeal was a potent mix of raw physical power, the ever-present aura of danger, and the bright, fleeting flame of celebrity. A gladiator represented a primal, thrilling alternative to the polished, politically minded men of the Roman elite. He was strength and survival personified, a walking embodiment of a life lived on the edge, and for many in a rigidly controlled society, that was an irresistible fantasy. Yet this attraction was layered with a deep and inescapable social contradiction. While a gladiator could be a heartthrob, he was also legally and socially branded as infamies, a person of low and disgraced standing. By choosing the arena, a free man voluntarily stepped outside the bounds of respectable society. He could not vote, hold public office, or be seen as a reliable witness in a court of law. In the eyes of the law and the upper classes, he was tainted. This created a powerful, forbidden tension. The very same man a noblewoman might dream about was the same man she would never be allowed to marry. To openly pursue a gladiator was a social scandal, a dangerous rebellion against the strict codes of class and dignity. This complex reality makes the graffiti from Pompeii so revealing. It shows us that public desire triumphed over private scorn. The gladiator existed in a strange social limbo, adored by the masses and desired in secret by the elite, yet ultimately denied the full respectability his fame might suggest. He was a celebrity who was not quite a gentleman, a sex symbol who was legally an outcast, a living paradox of ancient Roman desire. This powerful image of Christian martyrs bravely facing lions is one of the most enduring legacies of the Roman arena. Yet this narrative, so central to our cultural memory, is built on a profound historical exaggeration. While persecutions did occur, they were not the daily bread of the Colosseum. The primary purpose of the games was never religious genocide. These were state-sponsored spectacles of entertainment and political control, and the victims were far more likely to be common criminals than peaceful Christians. The great persecutions were sporadic, often localized, and almost always driven by specific political crises. An emperor like Nero might blame Christians for a great fire to divert public anger, or a ruler like Diocletian might see their refusal to worship the state gods as an act of political treason. These were not systematic campaigns to fill the amphitheater with believers. In fact, for the first 3 centuries of Christianity's existence, its followers were a relatively small and often ignored sect within the vast empire. The logistics alone make the Hollywood version impossible. Supplying enough lions and enough dedicated Christian prisoners to provide a regular execution spectacle would have been an unimaginable and unsustainable burden. The vast majority of those condemned to die in the arena, a fate known as damnatio ad bestias, were convicted criminals, murderers, bandits, and rebels whose public death served as a grim warning against breaking Roman law. This does not diminish the very real suffering of early Christian martyrs, but it reframes their story. They were not the main event, but rather a powerful, symbolic minority whose ultimate sacrifice was amplified by the very spectacle designed to break them. The arena was a tool of the state, and it was wielded with political calculation, not religious fervor, turning all who died within it into a message for the living. The weapons you see in film are often oversized props designed to look impressive on camera. A real gladiator's sword was a brutally efficient tool, not a heavy, unwieldy piece of stage metal. The iconic gladius, for example, was surprisingly short, with a blade typically around 20 inches long. This was not a limitation, but a deliberate design choice for close-quarters combat in the arena. A shorter sword was lighter, faster, and could be thrust and parried with incredible speed, allowing a fighter to exploit gaps in his opponent's armor without overcommitting his balance. Compare this to the massive, broadsword-like weapons often seen in movies, which would have been exhausting to swing and left the fighter dangerously exposed after every missed blow. The same principle of functional design applied to their armor. Hollywood frequently gets the details wrong, dressing gladiators in generic, mismatched pieces. In reality, every piece of armor was specialized for their fighting class. Take the greaves, the protective shin guards. A murmillo, with his large, rectangular shield, only wore a single greave on his lead leg, the one most exposed when adopting a fighting stance. His shield-covered arm and other leg were considered protected enough. The Rosciarius, the nimble fisherman, wore no leg armor at all, as his survival depended on speed and agility, notwithstanding heavy blows. Archaeological finds from Pompeii and other sites reveal the true artistry of this equipment. These were not crude, beaten pieces of iron. A gladiator's helmet could be a masterpiece of bronze smithing, intricately decorated with scenes from mythology and inlaid with silver or brass. The surface was often highly polished, not just for show, but to gleam brilliantly in the sun, turning the fighter into a dazzling spectacle for the distant seats in the amphitheater. Even the humble greave was often sculpted with detailed musculature, making the warrior's leg appear both protected and powerfully divine. This combination of deadly function and stunning spectacle reveals the gladiator's world in its true light. He was not just a brawler, but a precision instrument, his entire kit a carefully balanced system of offense and defense, where every polished curve and weighted edge served a purpose in the dance of life and death. Every piece of polished armor and every roar of the crowd was powered by a sophisticated economic engine. Behind the spectacle of blood and sand stood the lanista, a sharp-eyed entrepreneur running a high-risk, high-reward business. He was not merely a trainer, but the owner and chief executive of a troop of fighters, a walking corporation of violence. His primary asset was his stable of gladiators, and his primary service was renting them out. When a politician or emperor wanted to host games, he did not buy fighters outright. He contracted with a lanista, paying a substantial fee to lease the gladiators for the event. The contract was meticulous, specifying the number of fighters, their classes, and the duration of their services. It even included clauses for insurance, stipulating extra payments if a gladiator was killed or permanently maimed, ensuring the Lannister's investment was protected against catastrophic loss. The cost of mounting these games was staggering, a fortune spent in a single day. For a rising politician, a successful munera was the ultimate campaign advertisement. He was not buying bread for the people, he was buying their goodwill, their cheers, and ultimately, their votes. This practice was a form of public benefaction known as eugetism, a social contract where the elite displayed their wealth and generosity to earn political capital and social status. The editor, the sponsor, would parade into the arena, resplendent in his toga, and personally fund the prizes, the costumes, and the elaborate scenery. He was paying for a memory, for his name to be chanted by thousands. For an emperor, the stakes were even higher. A magnificent series of games could cement his popularity and legitimacy, a display of power so grand it silenced dissent. But the financial pressure was immense. The Emperor Titus, celebrating the opening of the Colosseum, funded games that lasted for 100 days, a spectacle that must have drained the imperial treasury. This was an economy where political influence was the currency, and human lives were the commodity traded on its floor, so the next time you visualize the arena, see more than the combatant. See the intricate web of contracts, loans, and ambitions that made each clash of steel possible. A brutal business where fame, power, and profit were all on the line. That lone hero standing against an entire army makes for a thrilling movie climax, but it is pure fantasy when applied to the gladiatorial arena, standard professional combat was an intensely personal affair, a carefully orchestrated duel between two equally matched fighters. The Lanista and the game's editor were in the business of putting on a good show, and a one-sided slaughter was the opposite of good entertainment. A fair fight, where skill and strategy could shine, was what kept the crowd on the edge of their seats, and more importantly, what protected their financial investments. Pitting one man against multiple opponents at once would have been seen as a wasteful and chaotic disgrace, a sure way to get a valuable fighter killed for no good reason. The entire system was built around the singular contest of martial artistry. Think of it like a modern boxing promotion. You would never see a single boxer forced to fight 5 other professionals in the ring simultaneously. It would be unfair, unsporting, and would destroy the very athletes the promoters depend on. The Romans felt the same way. Their duels were the main event, the showcase of disciplined courage. So when did mass battles occur? They were reserved for entirely different parts of the spectacle. The morning's beast hunts might involve multiple Venators working together to corral and dispatch dangerous animals. And the grim midday executions often involved throwing condemned criminals, the Noxii, into the arena en masse to be killed by animals or by a single skilled warrior, a punishment that was as much about efficiency as it was about terror. These were not contests. They were one-sided demonstrations of state power. The only true exception was the incredible Naumatia, the staged naval battle, but that was a massive, rare, and staggeringly expensive special effect involving thousands of men, not a standard gladiator bout. The reality of the arena was a focused, intimate duel, a deadly dance between two professionals where every parry and thrust was a calculated move in a high-stakes game. Before the first clash of steel, a sacred ritual transformed condemned men into honorable warriors. This ceremony began with the Sacramentum Gladiatorum, the gladiator's oath, a vow more binding than any chain. In a solemn moment away from the roaring crowd, these men pledged to endure being burnt, bound, beaten, and killed by the sword. By speaking these words, they willingly surrendered their bodies to the violence of the arena and the will of their trainer. This was not a vow made under the lash, but a conscious choice to embrace a new code of honor. It was a spiritual contract that erased their past, whether they were free volunteers or enslaved prisoners, and rebirthed them as gladiators bound by a shared discipline. This oath was the foundation upon which the entire spectacle was built, turning raw violence into a structured, almost sacred performance. Following this pledge, the fighters would prepare for their public debut. They did not simply walk into the arena. They entered it as part of the Pampa, a formal and dazzling parade. Led by musicians and litter bearers carrying statues of the gods, the gladiators marched in full battle regalia, their polished armor and plumed helmets glittering under the sun. This was their moment of glory, a chance to be seen not as brutes, but as celebrated athletes. The crowd would roar its approval for favorites, their names echoing through the vast amphitheater. The procession would culminate before the raised podium of the editor, the wealthy patron who had financed the games. Here, the ritual reached its dramatic peak. In a powerful display of transparency, the gladiators would present their weapons not for attack, but for inspection. They would approach the editor and demonstrate that their blades were sharp, real, and deadly. This was not a threat. It was a crucial piece of political theater, a public guarantee that the sponsor was providing a genuine, high-stakes contest, not a staged pantomime. It proved his wealth and his commitment to giving the people an authentic spectacle. These rituals, from the private oath to the public arms check, wove a web of meaning around the coming bloodshed. They were the necessary ceremony that elevated a simple fight into a story of courage, honor, and Roman virtue, a story where every man, regardless of his origin, had chosen his role. Even when the crowd roared for death, the killing was never chaotic. A gladiator's final moments followed a strict, chilling protocol. After a decisive blow or a clear surrender, the defeated fighter was expected to demonstrate supreme courage. He would kneel, grip his own thigh to steady himself, and bow his head, presenting his neck for the final stroke. This was not a moment of panic, but a final performance of stoic dignity. The victorious gladiator would then step forward, his own emotions masked by his helmet. He did not wildly hack at his opponent. He aimed his sword with brutal precision, driving the point down into the base of the neck or directly through the collarbone, seeking the heart in a single, efficient thrust. This was a mercy of sorts, a quick death delivered with professional respect between warriors who shared the same harsh profession. The spectacle, however, did not end there. Almost immediately, two eerie figures would emerge from the arena gates. These were the arena attendants, but they were costumed as gods of the underworld. One was dressed as Charon, the ferryman who carried souls across the river Styx. The other impersonated Mercury, the messenger god who guided the dead to the afterlife. Their presence transformed a physical death into a mythological journey. The man playing Charon would test the body for any sign of life, not with a gentle touch, but with a red-hot iron or a heavy hammer. This final, gruesome act was the official confirmation of death. Then, the body was unceremoniously hooked and dragged through the gate of death, the Porta Libitonensis, named for the goddess of funerals. This entire ritual served a profound purpose. It sanitized the brutality, wrapping a raw execution in the solemnity of religious theater. It assured the audience that the man was not just slaughtered, but that his soul was being properly escorted to the next world. The violence was made orderly, and death itself became just another part of the show. A gladiator's final victory was not always his last. For the fortunate few who survived their years in the arena, a different kind of life awaited beyond the sand. The ultimate symbol of this transition was not a golden crown or a chest of coins, though those were often part of it, but a simple wooden sword. This was the rudis, a training weapon that became the most coveted prize of all. When a gladiator was granted his freedom, the editor of the games would formally present him with this symbolic blade. It was a powerful gesture. The wooden sword that had been used to train him for violence was now the very object that declared his release from it. He was no longer a man who lived by the sharp edge of steel. He was free, so what did a retired gladiator do with his hard-won liberty? The paths were varied, often shaped by the fame and fortune he had accumulated. The most natural transition was to remain within the world he knew best. A veteran fighter, his body a living textbook of combat, could become a doctor, a trainer, passing his hard-earned knowledge to the next generation. His experience was invaluable, and a top Lannister would pay well for his expertise. Other retired gladiators leveraged their formidable reputations and physiques to become bodyguards for wealthy politicians or merchants. Who better to protect a life than a man who had spent his own defying death for a living? Some, the true superstars who had amassed great wealth, could simply retire, purchasing a small farm or a tavern and living comfortably off their earnings. They were local celebrities, their scars a badge of honor that commanded respect. Yet this new life was rarely a complete escape. The physical toll was immense. We see evidence of this in the remains of gladiators. Skeletons marked by healed fractures and chronic arthritis, the body's permanent record of a brutal career. And beyond the physical pain, there were the invisible wounds. How could a man who had lived for years under the roar of a bloodthirsty crowd, who had faced mortality every time he stepped onto the sand, ever truly find peace in the quiet of the countryside? The psychological scars must have run deep, a constant, silent companion to his freedom. The award of the Rudis was a bittersweet triumph. It represented the end of a life defined by violence, but also the beginning of a new life forever marked by it. The echoes of the arena did not fade with the fall of Rome. Instead, the gladiator was reborn, his image polished and reshaped by every new era. Medieval storytellers transformed these Roman fighters into chivalric knights in all but name, paragons of strength and honor in a world hungry for legendary heroes. The artists of the Renaissance saw in their sculpted forms the perfect model of the human ideal, a symbol of classical virtue and tragic beauty. But it was the birth of cinema that truly resurrected the gladiator for the modern age, cementing him as a timeless archetype. Hollywood did not simply tell stories about these warriors, it built a new mythology around them. The gladiator became the ultimate underdog, a solitary figure of integrity pitted against a corrupt and decadent empire. This archetype taps into something deep within us, a universal story of the individual fighting for freedom against an oppressive system. We see this narrative echoed everywhere, from the rebellious samurai of a Kurosawa film to the freedom fighters of a science fiction epic. The problem is not that these stories are powerful, but that their power is so complete it has nearly erased the original, the complex contractual professional, the celebrity athlete bound by a strict code, has been replaced by the brooding, rebellious slave. We have traded historical nuance for a more compelling and more marketable symbol. This romanticized version is so pervasive that when we finally uncover the truth, the real gladiator seems almost unfamiliar, a stranger hiding in plain sight behind the mask of a Hollywood legend. His true story is not one of pure rebellion, but of a far more fascinating negotiation between brutality and honor, between slavery and stardom, within the heart of the ancient world's most extraordinary entertainment machine. The skeletons unearthed from a gladiator cemetery in Ephesus speak a language far more truthful than any Hollywood script. These bones are the final, unedited record of the gladiator's life, etched with the brutal poetry of their profession. Forensic archaeologists examining these remains have pieced together a story that both confirms and shatters our expectations. The first clue came not from their wounds, but from their very chemistry. Analysis of the bones revealed a diet that was surprisingly vegetarian, heavily based on barley, beans, and dried fruit. This is not the meat-heavy feast of a primitive brute, but the carefully calibrated carb loading of an endurance athlete. It was the ancient equivalent of a power bar, designed to build a protective layer of fat and provide sustained energy for fighting in the heavy armor under the scorching sun. This barley gruel, while unappetizing, was a testament to their value. They were being scientifically fed for peak performance. The injuries tell an even more dramatic story. The trauma on these skeletons is not random. It shows a distinct, almost choreographed pattern. We find very few defensive wounds on the arms and hands, which tells us these men did not flail wildly to protect themselves. Instead, the damage is concentrated on the skull and in specific, targeted areas. Many skulls show evidence of healing from blunt force trauma, likely from the heavy, non-lethal training weapons they used for years. More telling are the lethal wounds. Several skeletons display a single, precise, small square hole at the base of the skull or through the collarbone. This is the exact mark left by the killing thrust of a trident or a short sword, delivered with clinical efficiency to a defeated and kneeling opponent. These are not the chaotic slashes of a back alley brawl. They are the signatures of a rule-bound, ritualized execution. Perhaps the most surprising evidence, however, is of the medical care they received. These men had access to some of the best doctors in the Roman world. Healed fractures show clean, professional setting. One famous skeleton even shows a clear, smooth-bore hole in his skull, evidence of a trepanation procedure to relieve pressure from a head injury. This was advanced, life-saving surgery. The bone had healed, meaning he survived the operation and lived to fight another day. This level of care was not provided out of kindness, but out of cold, hard economic sense. A healed gladiator was a returning investment, a star who could fight again and again. The bones from Ephesus are the ultimate witness. They confirm the gladiator was a disciplined professional who ate for performance, fought by a code, and was patched up with the best medicine money could buy, all for the sake of the show. Hollywood's greatest gladiator films are often its most historically reckless. Let us dismantle a few of the most egregious errors, starting beneath the sand of the arena itself. The film Gladiator depicts a vast, open hypogeum, a labyrinth of cells and cages under the Colosseum floor. In reality, this underground world was a cramped, chaotic masterpiece of Roman engineering, a dense network of elevators, pulleys, and ramps powered by enslaved workers. It was a backstage area of organized frenzy, not the spacious dungeon seen on screen. Then there is the matter of riding into battle. Many films show gladiators or Roman cavalry using stirrups, but this is a complete fabrication. Stirrups were a medieval invention that would not appear in Europe for centuries after the fall of Rome. A rider had to rely on pure strength and balance, gripping the horse with his legs alone. The armor is another frequent offender. Movie makers often mix and match pieces from different periods and regions, creating a generic warrior that never existed. You might see a helmet from the 1st century, paired with a sword from the 3rd or Celtic body armor on a fighter who should be wearing distinctly Roman gear. This mishmash destroys the historical specificity that defined the gladiator classes, but the single biggest inaccuracy is not a prop or a set design. It is the core theme of The Lone Rebel. Hollywood adores the gladiator as a freedom fighter, a man who stands alone against the empire for a personal cause. The truth is, the games were the very opposite of rebellion. They were the ultimate symbol of institutional control, a spectacle funded by the state to reinforce the social order. The gladiator was a compliant professional, not a revolutionary. His story was one of working within a brutal system, not of tearing it down. These are not just nitpicks. They are fundamental misunderstandings that replace the complex, gritty reality of Roman life with a simpler, more modern fantasy. The real spectacle was not one man's defiance, but the terrifying and magnificent power of the machine that made him. So the dust settles on the arena, and the myths we have carried for so long begin to crumble. The gladiator emerges not as a slave in chains, but as a complex professional, a willing participant in a brutal yet structured sport where fame and fortune were real possibilities. The games themselves were far more than simple blood sport. They were a sophisticated blend of athletic competition, dramatic theater, and raw political power, a tool used to control, to impress, and to bind an empire together with spectacle. Hollywood gives us thrilling stories of rebellion and revenge, and while those are powerful narratives, the historical truth is, in its own way, even more fascinating. It reveals a world where violence was codified into ritual, where death was sanitized by ceremony, and where man could trade his body for a shot at immortality. The next time you watch a historical epic, let it be a starting point. Ask what the filmmakers got right and what they sacrificed for the sake of a good story. The real past is always more complicated, more surprising, and more human than any fiction. What was the most surprising gladiator fact you learned today? Or what is a historical myth you have always believed? Share your thoughts in the comments below.